Hello everyone, my name is Alan Sampsell and this is my channel, Alan's Cloud. This video we're going to expand on my previous video on installing Docker into a Ubuntu LXC container inside of Proxmox. In that first video, I only actually went through the setup in Proxmox of creating the LXC container for Ubuntu based off of a template. Didn't actually go through any of the instructions. I did link to the page that I'm going to use for this particular video. I thought I might start off by installing it and then showing you the installation of Portainer, which is a container management software. It's really useful, especially when you're first starting out and you're not maybe familiar with most of the Docker runtime commands. Really useful, very handy to have, very easy to set up. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, stick around. So first, let's talk about the previous video that I did where we actually created the LXC container inside of Proxmox. Based on a Ubuntu 18.04 template. That is the basis that we're going to use for our Docker container system. Very handy. It is secure based on this newer way to create that LXC container using keyctl option and the nested virtualization option. Let me show you here in Proxmox what we've done. So we kind of went through this before, but and I haven't touched this container since that video, other than just a few minutes ago to enable logging in via SSH in a different program. I prefer using a program called Remoter instead of the VNC system. It's basically right here at the console that you have available. There's no VNC. It's good, but it's kind of limited in the fact that you can't scroll, and there's a couple of other options. I can change the font size and things like that so that I can better show you guys. You'll see here in a minute. But basically, this LXC container here is what we created last time. I know the root is the username, and I set up the test password before, and I remember that, and so I can get into it. And also I remember the IP address. All of those things are very important. And when you're creating your container, I advise you to write that down. If you use some sort of a notepad program in your phone, or some sort of a note, even write it down physically. You don't want to lose these things. My point is you set these things up, and then over time, I know I forget, so I have to write things down. But that's just a tip if you want to actually set any of these Docker containers up and then be able to get back into the system later on if there's problems or you want to set something else up. So inside of this container here, I have, again, not touched it. We're running Ubuntu 18.04. And basically, I'm going to step you through the website here on how to install Docker onto that Ubuntu 18.04. This is what I use when I created my production LXC container with all the Docker components that I'm running inside of it. So this is what I'm going to run you through here. Bring that up. Okay. Second. I bring that up. You won't be able to see the website, but basically I'm following along in step 1, which is just installing Docker. As I mentioned before, you are logged in as root inside of this container, so you don't actually have to use the sudo command that's on here. So we're just going to run this without those commands. We'll alter things just a little bit. Let's see here. I don't think yet we're at the basic level there. I'm gonna go back to, okay, we're good. Just checking to see where I am. That's not actually necessary. So let's do an apt update. So that first step, make sure that everything in here is up to date. Okay. 57 packages can be upgradable. Here. Go apt upgrade. Yes, we want to do it. Should be relatively quick. It's always a good idea when you're first starting off to go ahead and upgrade any of the packages for any of the security updates or just general configuration updates. Okay, new file. How about the version installed currently has been locally modified. What do you want to do about the modified configuration file? Keep the local version currently installed because that's how I'm connected to this thing. Okay. All right. So did our update there. Now because we did that update, there are a few prerequisite packages that you're going to have to install in order to have Docker and all of the things that it needs. So we're going to do apt install bt tac transport tac https space ca tac certificates. We're going to curl software tac properties comment. Just make sure I'm not thing. Nope, looks like I'm good. I'm gonna hit enter. Yep, it's going to take a couple of megs to do this. Again, shouldn't take too long. Okay, so now we have our prerequisite packages installed. Now we're going to actually add the GPG key for the official Docker registry. We're going to curl once again, tac fs big S big L. Since command line here is case sensitive, so it's very important you type that in correctly. Download .docker com/linux /ubuntu ambient ubuntu /gpg. I'm going to do a pipe sudo. Oh, we're just going to do apt key add tac. Don't think, yep, that's it for that command. Okay, we got our good output. Moving on. Now we're going to add the Docker repository into the Ubuntu repository list. We're going to do add tac pt tac repository and quote deb. It's always getting me. Search equals AMD 4 bracket https:// download.docker.com/linux/ubuntu base more here bionic stable end quote. All right, and enter. Okay, now that's done. Let's see here. Now we're going to do an update again. Apt update. Okay, so you can see here that not only did it do the regular Ubuntu ones, it also did the Docker. Right? That's good. Okay. And here, apt cache policy Docker -ce. Okay, so it's telling us here that those packages are available. That's the version, the candidate that would be installed when we do this. So that's good. Now finally we are going to install Docker. apt install docker -ce. Yep, let's do it. Again, it's not ginormous. These installs, these containers work really quick. There you go, it's done. And we can test that that has worked. Doing a systemctl status docker. Okay. There's our PID 7797. That'll change for everybody. Okay. Control C out of that, not Control X. Let's see. Okay. So now we can test Docker itself. Yep. So again, this is what I like about Remoter. In the other VNC from the Proxmox, you can't scroll up like this. And maybe you can parse the files differently, but this is the nice thing. There's a lot of help files built into Docker. It is a little bit complex of a language to run at the command line. Lot to remember, but if you're working with it all the time, that's not a problem. But that's kind of why I like using Portainer. And because it does automate certain aspects of it, and I don't have to remember a bunch of the command line. So let's see here. There are different options. Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'll show you back here. I'll show you Docker Hub. So that was it for the install of Docker itself. Pretty easy. It's up and running. And now, I want to show you. First thing you got to do is you got to do at least one install from the command line, and that is Portainer itself. Once you've installed Docker, then you actually have to spin up some containers based on images. And where you go to get those images, the majority of the time is going to be Docker Hub. Now, you can get them from other repositories. Maybe your company runs their own. But this is all home lab stuff, so I'm pulling 90% of the time off of the Docker Hub itself. Super easy. You go to Docker Hub, they got a search bar up here at the top, and you just type in Portainer. And Portainer by them is the official one. You can see it's been downloaded over 10 million times, a few by me. And if you just wanted to pull the image, and again, this is some of the lingo that's unique to Docker. The image is all of the files that is the basis for creating the container. When you take the image and you create the container, you put different configurations against it that make it slightly unique, and that's the actual running container, and the image is just used to create that container. So in here in the Docker Hub, when you actually come in and take a look at these things, there's actually, if you were to just search for Portainer, there's several things that pop up. You can have other people's other images that do different things. So that's why I say you got to be careful in what you select. But this is the official one here. You scroll down, and each one of these, some of them have the instructions built right into this page on the command that actually spins up the image into the container. But these guys here, they've got a different site here. You click on this one, it's going to bring you to this website, and it's going to be the what normally is on that other website. They just have different options of it for installing in a swarm, how to persist the data, and we'll cover that here in the quick start piece. This is the first command here is kind of important because there's you know, the containers that you create aren't persistent. You know, as soon as you spin up another container, you shut it down, you turn it back on, none of the data is saved by default when you've created the container, unless you do one of two things. Well, I suppose there's a third thing. If it's a trusted container, you can set up external storage, right? But most of the time, in the way that I have this set up, you're not going to be able to get to any, you know, different types of shares on your network. So know that now. But for persisting information, if you want to be able to have your containers and what they do survive a reboot of the container and of the Proxmox host itself, you want to actually set up persistent data. And to do that, you can do it two ways. This first command that they're doing here is to create what's called a Docker volume. And you set that up first, and then you actually run the second command, which I'll show you here in a minute, to actually set up Portainer and spin up that container. So the Docker volume is slightly different than the other way, which is called a bind mount. A bind mount takes a specific file folder on your host machine. In our case, it's the Ubuntu machine that you know, you saw from the SSH. If I was to create a folder there in my home folder, I could technically use a bind mount and sort of mirror that folder on the host inside of the Docker container that I spin up. So, you know, that whatever the Docker container application is using that file. And I'll show you how that's done here in a little bit too. So the important part here is we're going to actually create a Portainer data volume first, and it'll actually be located in the specific Docker volumes folder, and I'll show you where it creates those. And that's going to help us persist our information. And this is kind of important because you can do both inside of Portainer, but I've noticed a little bit of funkiness, and it's probably just the way that I was doing it, but this is the easiest way that I have found to persist information inside of one of these containers. So again, I'm going to be doing this from the website, but you folks are going to see from the command line here itself. So first thing we're going to do here is, this is a Docker command. We're going to be creating a volume. Well, and here, Docker volume. Let's just show you. So these are the commands that the Docker volume command has available to it. You can create one, you can inspect them, you know, look inside one, you can list them out. And so let's do that one here first. Docker volume ls, and pretty much right there it's showing you that we have 0 volumes created. So this first command that we're going to do to set up Portainer, we're going to do Docker volume create Portainer _ data. Okay, so that's the output. And then if we go back to the Docker volume ls and list them out, you can see that we now have a local volume called Portainer _ data. And so now we're actually going to set up Portainer itself. We're going to just do this the quick way. Docker run tac d tac p. This is where you set the port, and the first one on this left side here is the host port. So when you want to point your browser at something from, you know, a different machine, that's the port you're going to be setting it to. And the one inside of the container is just important as well. Sometimes that really matters to the software that you're running. But we're going to mirror this up. So 9000 on the inside is going to be talking to 9000 on the outside to the host. And then we're actually going to name this container that we spin up. If you don't put this name in here, it will give it one according to the Docker random naming conventions. They can actually be pretty funny, but we're going to name ours Portainer. We're going to give it the restart policy of always. And then this tac v here is the volume mount command, but what we're actually telling it both inside of the container and the inside of on the host itself is on the left of the colon, and on the right of it is what's happening inside of the container itself. So for this Portainer container, we're mounting this Docker sock file, and this is what allows us to manage the when the website pops up. This is what allows us to connect to Docker from the container that we're creating with Docker. I know it's a little odd, but that's just how it works. We're going to do var run docker.sock and then colon, then there's no space there, var run docker.sock. Okay, and so the next volume mount that we're going to connect to, since we already created the Docker volume Portainer underscore data, that's the persistent volume that we are going to use for the data for this container. Portainer underscore data is what we created. That's the Docker volume, and then where we're going to mount it inside of Docker itself is in the /data folder. So then there's a space, and then the last portion of this is you are identifying the actual image that you want to create this from. One would think you'd probably want to identify that first, but I don't actually think it really matters. Portainer. Okay. So once again, so we've got Docker is the command line. That's what starts this off. We're going to run tac-d. I'm not familiar with what that actually means. Tac-p is setting this port information. Tac name, and then Portainer is actually the name of it. And I realize you folks probably can't see all of this at this point. So let's do this. Okay. So left off with name as Portainer, and then tac restart policy as always. Then we're going to tac v is our first bind mount. Actually, this isn't a volume. This isn't a Docker volume yet. We're going to mount this docker.sock file from the host where it's located there at var run, and we're actually going to put that inside of the container itself that we spin up at var run docker.sock. And again, that's so that we can run it locally, and I'll show you that once this is spun up. So the next volume that we're going to do here, the tac-v, is the Portainer underscore data persistent volume that we created. This is the Docker volume. It's going to be located inside of the Docker container Portainer at /data. And then Portainer is the name of the on the Docker hub of the image that we're going to use as the base for this. So first it's going to have to pull that image down. Then it actually spins up the container based on all the rest of the information that you'll see here. So we're just going to hit enter. After I click inside the box. So it couldn't find it locally. That's an important part. So it goes out and it pulls it from the Docker hub. So it pulled it complete. It downloaded it, and then this long string of numbers right here and letters is actually the fact that we do have a Docker container running. So we should be able to take a look at that, and we will here just in a minute, but let me actually show you where that persistent Docker container is located. So once again, where we are, I'm going to go to where is that? rlib. It should be Docker, then volumes. Okay, and okay. So you can see there that inside of var library, it's lib Docker volumes is where it created that persistent Docker container, right? And we can actually CD into that Portainer and see that what it created was a file folder called _data. Now it's kind of interesting because inside of Portainer itself, you can't map anything to that, and I don't know that I'll bother showing you that. Again, lessons learned on my part. I had set everything up and had all kinds of Docker containers running, my 4 or 5 favorite, and then rebooted the machine, or I was messing around with pruning, trying to create some more space to run another Docker container, and end up pruning all of my persistent data structure completely out, so that when I rebooted, I'd lost everything. So lesson learned there is you just set these up and set one individually for each of the containers that you do, and so long as you're using an actual Docker volume, it will persist your information and survive your reboots. So now that I've actually shown you that, let me go back to the browser here, and I have a tab already set up, and the address of that LXC container that we've set up, 192.168.0.221, and then :9000, if you remember, that was the port that we had set up. So we're going to actually just hit enter on this, and here we go. So Portainer is up and running inside of that LXC Ubuntu container. So admin is the default administrative username. We're just going to set up a password here, test at test. I'm going to create that user. We're not going to save that. So here's an important piece. This is why we mounted that docker.sock file. When we click here, because if you're going to manage something remotely from this Docker container, you're going to manage a different swarm or a different Docker instance. That's fine. Haven't gone through that, so I don't know how to do that part yet. But the local piece, and it actually tells you right here that you have to have started off in Linux, which is we're using Ubuntu here as the LXC container base. You have to actually start this Portainer container with that docker.sock loaded, and we did. So when we hit connect here we go. It's going to find it, and so we are now logged in as the admin, and this is our local. We don't have any stacks. We have one container, and the container that we have up and running right now is Docker. Is Portainer itself, and the image is that Portainer/Portainer image that we use to create this whole Portainer image. So if you want to take a look at what's going on inside of this, you just click on here, and then we can click on containers. And what you can see, this is the name that we called it. We passed it the name one. This is the image that it's actually based off of. This is the internal IP address that it's using for Docker itself, because it's actually connected to the network bridge. This is the port information that we're using. If you actually click on these that don't really work, you can probably see that in the bottom left hand corner. You're actually getting quadruple zeros and then the port information. So if you click that, it's not actually going to go through. But over here on the left, you can click on images, and so this is that Portainer/Portainer, and then here's the tag that it pulled down was the latest one, and you can see the Portainer size for that image is only 74 meg, so it's relatively small. The networks that we've got available to us: None, Host, and Bridge. Bridge is the one that they're all going to be using here. Important piece here: this is the Docker volume that we created. Very important that we know that this data here is where it's mounted inside of the container, and the container that's actually using it right now is that Portainer one. So you can come in here and add volume and create them this way as well, but you have to be cognizant of how you're going about doing that, whether or not you're creating a bind mount. It's actually kind of easier to do this from the command line interface, like we did, Docker volume create, and then give it a name. it's that easy. Inside of here, not so much. But this, Portainer, I think it gets a really bad rap. I think it's a very powerful program, very easy to use and to automate certain things. So very, very useful to anyone who's just beginning in the Docker environment. Again, I encourage everybody to learn the command line, but Portainer itself is very handy for just having one-stop shopping place to go. Now that you know this IP address up here, I just create a bookmark favorite of it, and that way I can just log in here and check on my containers and go from there. So one of the nice things, when you click on the, you can see the status that it's running. You can, check box it, and then you can come up here and you can stop it. You can restart one, kill it. You can remove it, and then it'll ask you if you want to delete the volumes that are associated with it as well, and you can do that. And you can add a container straight from here as well. Not the easiest to go through the configuration here. Well, most of the times, 9 times out of 10, you're going to find that it's easier to actually go to that command line and spin up your containers based on the instructions on the Docker Hub and do it from there. That's when you're creating new ones. But if you've already started one, you can actually click on the link here. So these are all the settings for this running container. And one of the nice things about it, it even tells you, what its IP address is, the MAC address, the fact that we have mounted that docker.sock file is in here. Again, this is the host, and this is the path inside of the Docker container that's running. Same thing with the volume itself, and then where it's located inside of the container. This is, everything that you need to know. You can go to the console of the running container itself and, hop inside of it, and, if there's bash commands, if it's running Linux inside of the container, you can, command it from there. You can actually look at the logs if something's going wrong. If you started up a container and it's looping and it's doing something incorrect, you can come in here to the logs, and if it's kind of boot looping, shutting itself down and turning itself back on because you have the always restart option enabled, you can turn this auto refresh logs off, and then you can actually scroll through the logs and try to get some idea of what's going wrong with it. So that's another tip there. But another big one is, if you wanted to make an edit to, say you start one up and you didn't get it quite right. One of the nice features that Portainer likes, that I like Portainer to do, is to automate that process of creating a new container. You can just click on this duplicate edit. You can actually edit the current one. So if you make a change to this and you didn't change the file name, you can come down here and, if there was an environmental variable that you wanted to change, these are where they're located, right? If you got the network wrong, if somehow it gave it a different network and you weren't able to reach it, you could come here to network and you could switch this here over to bridge, the one that is going to work. Same thing with the volumes. This is where it really comes in handy, because it shows you that the Docker sock piece here is a bind mount and it's writable, and the fact that we're using a container. Again, it's interesting that the Portainer data, when you do a Docker volume create like that, it doesn't show you that other underscore data folder where the information really resides. So that was kind of a gotcha on my part. But and you can switch this over. So you did want to do a bind mount instead instead of using an actual volume to persist your information, you can switch it over here. Set the exact path. That's what makes it a bind mount. You can't just put something in there, a name like we did before. It won't work. That's how you make one of the volumes. For a bind mount, you have to give it the exact file path that it's where you want to give it. So once you've made those changes, and you say you just want to edit the running one and have it, shut down the current container and spin up the new one with the changes that you've just made, don't change the name. That's all you have to do. And then you hit this button here, deploy the container, and it will pop up and say, hey, there's already a running container with that name. Do you want to replace it? And you say yes. And so that's a very handy way of trying to work your way through some of the problems that you might run into when setting up containers. But also, if you like a container and you want to try out a different configuration, but you don't want to kill the current one, you can actually make your changes and give it a different name here, call it -test1 or, whatever you want to call it. And then, whatever the changes are that you made, or if you just wanted two different versions of the same type of container, maybe with a different port to try out, you just hit deploy container, and it will, just stay on this page. It'll have a little, circle showing you that it's deploying the new container, and it will pop up with some green boxes here in the top right of the web page when it's done, telling you that it was either successful or that it didn't succeed, and you can move on from there. But the new container will actually show up here on this page. So you can kill it, you can pause them, you can do whatever you want. So this is Portainer. Again, it's very useful. I'm not saying don't try to understand the command line. I think you're going to use that, and then to automate some of the more tedious aspects of the Docker process, I think is where this Portainer program really comes in and shines. It's very handy. So, and again, in this video, we've gone through and built upon the first video where we created a Proxmox LXC Ubuntu container. We carried this one forward and we actually installed Docker inside of that container. Then we installed our first Docker container itself of Portainer, and we've set that up and we are logged into it, and we are able to create further containers from here. So I think that's pretty much it for this video. I will probably create another video or two for some of my other Docker containers that I really like, and show you how to spin them up from the command line, and what what variables to give them, and then maybe come in here to Portainer and show you those running, and kind of build out from there. So hopefully you found some of this information useful. Maybe you're new to Docker, maybe you're not. Maybe you just didn't have a good idea of what Portainer could do. It does have its quirks, but I think it's highly underrated. I mean, most people, they're going to tell you, oh, go to Rancher. I didn't feel the need. This pretty much does what I need it to do. You can check out the Docker command line structure and understand the different variables based on their website. And then, you can come in here and kind of figure out what's going on inside of Portainer as well. You can put two and two together. It's not that difficult. But I really like the way Portainer displays the visuals and automates some of these processes. So if you found this video interesting or useful, please like and subscribe. Trying to build a fan base here. I'm almost, I think I'm at 91 right now, so I'm almost at 100. And appreciate you guys. If you like this video, or you got any other questions or containers you think I might find fascinating, I'm always open to suggestions. That's the great thing about containers. If I don't like it, I can spin it up, test it out. It's like test driving a new car, and then just turn it in, just delete it when you're done. So yeah, I've had fun with this, and again, have a good one.